This video will discuss acts of extreme violence, unsettling behavior, and graphic details uncovered during a real-life murder investigation. Some of the material explored in this program may be deeply disturbing or emotionally difficult for some viewers. This story involves sensitive themes, forensic findings, and evidence that may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The story you are about to hear is one that investigators still talk about years later, not because they want to, but because they cannot forget it. Even seasoned detectives, people who have spent decades walking into crime scenes soaked in blood and grief, walked away from this case shaken. Some said they had never seen anything so cold, so methodical, or so brutally unnecessary. It began quietly, in a peaceful mountain town, on a holiday meant for family and gratitude. But behind one closed door, a young mother was about to face a nightmare planned by the very person she trusted most. Her name was Kelsey Bereth, and what happened to her is almost impossible to believe. Kelsey was 29 years old, soft-spoken, gentle, and full of the kind of warmth that made people feel calm just being around her. She was a flight instructor who took pride in her work. She loved simple things, baking, decorating for the holidays, quiet evenings with her baby girl. She had been engaged to a man named Patrick Frazee, a rancher who lived miles away on a remote property. Their relationship was complicated, but Kelsey kept most of those details to herself. To her friends and family, she looked like a woman trying to make her small family work, balancing long work hours with the joys and challenges of new motherhood. On Thanksgiving Day 2018, Kelsey texted her mother a cheerful message, "Happy Thanksgiving." Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing hinted that danger was coming. Her mother replied, expecting to hear from her later, maybe through a phone call or a photo of the baby celebrating her first holiday. But that follow-up call never came. Hours went by, then an entire day, then two. And the silence surrounding Kelsey grew louder and louder. What no one knew at the time was that while her phone still appeared active, Kelsey herself was already gone. She had been murdered in her own townhome, not by a stranger, not by a burglar, but by her fiancé, the father of her daughter, a man she had trusted with her home, her child, and her future. And the violence of what he did was something investigators later struggled to put into words. Earlier that day, security cameras captured Patrick walking toward Kelsey's apartment with a Starbucks drink in his hand. He moved calmly, as if he were simply dropping off a treat. Kelsey opened the door with her baby in her arms and let him inside without hesitation. Moments later, the door closed behind them. Nobody outside the home had any idea that this would be the last time Kelsey was ever seen alive. Inside that apartment, prosecutors later said, Patrick carried out an attack so brutal that the details made courtroom spectators cry. According to testimony, he blindfolded Kelsey under the pretense of a candle smell test, telling her he wanted her to guess different scents. As she stood there trusting him, unable to see, he picked up a baseball bat he had brought with him. And then in a moment investigators described as pure coldness, he swung once, not twice, but again and again, with enough force to leave blood covering the walls, the floors, and even the baby's toys in the living room. The violence was so extreme that it left patterns across the fireplace, sprayed into corners and soaked into the carpet. Patrick later told someone that Kelsey never even saw the first blow coming. But this horrific act did not happen in a moment of blind rage. It was not sudden or spontaneous. It was planned, carefully, over months. And the only reason the world knows about the planning is because of a woman named Crystal Lee, a nurse from Idaho, who had been secretly involved with Patrick for years. When she finally stepped forward, her confession stunned detectives. According to Crystal, Patrick had been talking about killing Kelsey for a long time. He had tried to get Crystal herself to do it. He asked her to poison Kelsey's coffee. He asked her to break into Kelsey's home. Each time, she claimed she couldn't bring herself to go through with it. But she didn't cut ties with Patrick. Instead, she stayed close. She listened. And after the murder happened, she did something even more shocking. She helped clean up the crime scene. According to her testimony, when she arrived at Kelsey's home days after Thanksgiving, she expected a mess. But nothing could have prepared her for what she walked into. The moment she opened the door, she saw blood on the wall near the fireplace, more on the floor, more on a baby's stuffed toy, more on the couch, blood that had been partially wiped, smeared, and attempted to be hidden. The apartment felt frozen in a moment of horror, as if the violence had soaked into the air itself. Crystal said she felt sick, but she stayed. She put on gloves, and she began wiping. For hours, she scrubbed every surface she could see. She tossed out items soaked in blood. She gathered cleaning supplies. She even removed parts of the flooring where the blood had seeped in too deep to wash away. She did this knowing exactly what had happened. She did this for the man she claimed she loved. And when investigators later asked her how she could clean a murder scene like someone cleaning a bathroom, she said she felt she had no choice. It was a statement that left investigators stunned, not because she said it, but because of how calmly she said it. Meanwhile, Patrick handled Kelsey's body with a coldness that investigators described as chilling. He placed her remains into a black plastic tote, loaded it into his truck, and drove it to his ranch. On that property, surrounded by miles of open land and no neighbors close enough to intervene, Patrick built a fire. A fire he fed with motor oil, gasoline, and anything that would burn hot enough to erase evidence. Flames reached high into the air, burning for hours. Later, witnesses said they smelled something strange in the area that night, something they couldn't identify, something they had never smelled before. When the fire died down, Patrick sifted through the ashes, searching for anything that might connect him to the crime. Whatever he found, he burned again. Prosecutors later described this process as bone-deep cruelty, a level of inhuman detachment that shocked even hardened investigators. He then disposed of the ashes in a dump site far from his home, making sure no trace of Kelsey remained. Even after doing all of this, Patrick wasn't satisfied. He wanted more time, more distance between himself and the crime. So he used Kelsey's phone, sending texts to her employer, to her mother, and even to himself. Messages designed to make it appear as if she had chosen to disappear. Messages that were cold, robotic, and completely out of character for her. He hoped these texts would buy him days, maybe weeks, before anyone realized she was missing. But there was one thing he didn't count on: a mother's intuition. Kelsey's mother felt something was wrong almost immediately. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't put it into words. But she knew her daughter wouldn't just stop communicating. She wouldn't walk away from her baby. She wouldn't ignore her family on a holiday. When calls went unanswered and messages seemed off, she reported Kelsey missing. And that single decision set off an investigation that would unravel everything Patrick had tried to cover. When police entered Kelsey's townhome, they noticed something strange right away. The house smelled strongly of chemicals, too strongly, as if someone had scrubbed every inch of it very recently. But even the best cleaning products can't hide everything, especially not from forensic lights. When investigators turned on the luminol and scanned the room, glowing blue patterns began to form. Patterns that no amount of scrubbing could erase. Patterns that told a story in droplets and smears, a violent attack, repeated blows, frantic cleanup attempts, and traces of blood soaked into places the killer never thought to check. One investigator said the room lit up like a map of what happened to Kelsey. Then came the digital evidence. Patrick believed that burning a body removed all traces of a crime. But he forgot about the one thing he couldn't burn: data. Phone records showed something impossible to ignore. Both Patrick's phone and Kelsey's phone traveled together, long after Kelsey was believed to be alive. Text messages from her phone pinged towers in locations Kelsey never visited. GPS logs placed Patrick near spots where evidence was later recovered. The digital trail was unmistakable. It contradicted every lie he told. Still, investigators needed more. They needed a witness. Someone who knew the truth. And that someone was Crystal. When she finally broke down and confessed, detectives said it was like listening to a horror movie being described in a calm, steady voice. She spoke of cleaning blood, destroying evidence, burning items, and listening to Patrick describe how he killed the mother of his child. Her testimony was cold, detached, and deeply disturbing, but it gave investigators what they needed, the inside story of the murder. When Patrick was arrested and brought to trial, the courtroom was filled with people searching for answers. Some wanted closure, some wanted justice. Others simply could not understand how a man could kill the mother of his baby with such calculated cruelty. Prosecutors didn't hold back. They walked the jury through the timeline step by step. They showed evidence of the cleanup, the phone records, the surveillance footage, and the blood patterns. They brought forward experts who explained the force required to create the splatter found in Kelsey's home. They let the jury hear in Crystal's own words how Patrick struck Kelsey again and again until she stopped moving. The room was silent as she spoke. Some jurors cried. Even reporters had difficulty listening. The most haunting part of the trial came when investigators described the aftermath, the burning, the attempts to hide the body, the cold efficiency of Patrick's actions. One detective said he had never seen someone show so little remorse, so little emotion, or so little humanity when discussing the mother of their own child. Another said the brutality of the scene would stay with him for the rest of his life. He meant it. No one in that courtroom walked away unchanged. When the verdict finally came, it was swift and unanimous. Patrick Frazee was found guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of tampering with a body, guilty of every charge the prosecution brought forward. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional decades for the other crimes. He will never walk free again. Crystal, though spared the harshest penalties due to her cooperation, was sentenced to prison as well. Her role in covering up the murder was too significant to ignore. Today, Kelsey's family is left to rebuild their lives. They are raising her daughter with love, shielding her from the darkness of what happened to her mother. They speak softly about Kelsey's kindness, her smile, her warmth, and the future she never had the chance to live. They do their best to honor her memory and ensure her daughter grows up knowing only the goodness of the woman she came from. Investigators who work the case still consider it one of the worst they have ever seen. Not just because of the level of violence, but because of the betrayal at its core. A man who should have protected Kelsey chose instead to destroy her. A woman who could have stopped it chose instead to help hide it. And a child was left without her mother because of it. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a moment of anger. This was a carefully crafted plan carried out with chilling precision. A plan that showed a level of cruelty even seasoned professionals struggled to comprehend. A plan so brutal that the people investigating it walked away deeply disturbed. And that is the true story of the murder that shook an entire community, terrified investigators, and left a permanent scar on everyone who learned the details. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is a good moment to do so. Subscribing ensures you never miss any of our true crime releases, and it helps support the time and effort that goes into bringing these stories to you. Your subscription genuinely makes a difference. What many people never heard about this case is everything that happened in the quiet months leading up to the murder. The signs that something was deeply wrong. The small moments that seemed harmless at the time, but later became dark puzzle pieces. Kelsey had been trying to make her relationship with Patrick work, but those close to her said she sometimes seemed confused, unsure, even emotionally drained. She never complained openly, never shared dramatic details, but she seemed to carry a weight that didn't belong on her shoulders. People later realized that the weight was the pressure of trying to build a life with a man who was slowly becoming more controlling, more distant, and more unpredictable. Patrick wasn't someone who argued loudly or threw fits. He controlled people quietly, with silence, with guilt, with cold, emotionless responses that left the other person questioning themselves. He had a way of making people feel like they were the problem, like their perfectly normal concerns were unreasonable. Kelsey, being gentle by nature, often tried to smooth things over rather than push back. She didn't want conflict. She wanted peace. She believed that with effort, things would improve. She believed their daughter deserved a stable home. What she didn't know was that Patrick had already moved far beyond thinking about reconciliation. He had moved into a place of planning, a dark place where he believed eliminating Kelsey would solve all of his problems. While Kelsey tried to build a home with love, Patrick was leading a life full of secrets, conversations with Crystal, lies to friends, manipulation disguised as everyday behavior. People who knew Patrick later said they didn't really know him at all. He was charming in public, polite in simple conversations, but emotionally shut off. A man with two faces, one for the world and one for the people trapped closest to him. As Patrick's plan grew, Kelsey had no idea she was in danger. She continued her routines. She took care of her daughter. She baked. She decorated her home for the holidays. She messaged her family. She lived her life as if her future were secure. And that is what makes this story even more painful. Not just the brutal way her life ended, but the innocence with which she walked into it. When the days after Thanksgiving passed and no one heard from her, worry turned into panic. Her mother called repeatedly. Every unanswered ring felt heavier. Every hour without contact felt wrong. Finally, unable to take the silence anymore, she reported Kelsey missing. That report set off a chain reaction that would expose a hidden world no one knew existed. Police in Woodland Park were not accustomed to cases like this. This was a small, tight-knit community. Missing people usually turned up within hours. But something felt different. From the moment officers entered Kelsey's home, they sensed a strange stillness, a wrongness. Even before they turned on the luminol, they felt the house was telling them something. And when the chemical lights revealed the truth, glowing splatter patterns, smeared traces of a struggle, the detectives knew they weren't dealing with a disappearance. They were dealing with a murder. The investigation became a race against time. Officers interviewed neighbors, they reviewed security footage, they traced financial records, they checked Kelsey's digital activity, and every lead seemed to point them closer and closer to someone they didn't expect. The man who should have been the first to help find her. Patrick acted strangely from the beginning, too calm, too unconcerned. His answers seemed rehearsed. His face gave nothing away. It wasn't just that he didn't seem worried, it was as if he didn't care at all. Detectives who interviewed him said he behaved like someone discussing a misplaced item, not a missing fiancée and the mother of his child. That calmness, that unnatural lack of emotion, was one of the first red flags that investigators noted. Meanwhile, Patrick was scrambling behind the scenes. He disposed of items. He contacted Crystal, urging her to stick to the story. He tried to control the narrative by planting the idea that Kelsey was unstable, overwhelmed, possibly planning to leave. He didn't realize that every lie he told only tightened the net around him. When Crystal finally cracked, she didn't do it dramatically. She didn't burst into tears. She didn't show the kind of shock people expected from someone involved in such horror. She simply spoke, calmly, softly, almost as if she were recounting someone else's actions, not her own. Investigators said that listening to her was one of the most surreal experiences of their careers. She talked about cleaning blood as if she were describing washing dishes. She described picking up a baby toy covered in blood as if it were a routine task. She even admitted she threw away Kelsey's belongings, wiped down appliances, and searched for anything that could tie Patrick to the scene. What disturbed investigators most was not just the violence, but the emotional emptiness behind it. Patrick's lack of remorse, Crystal's lack of urgency, the sheer coldness of the entire plan. As the investigation expanded, digital forensics experts brought forward evidence that painted a chilling timeline. Patrick's and Kelsey's phones moving in sync, calls made at odd hours, messages sent to create a false reality, logs showing that Patrick had been near locations crucial to the case on nights he claimed to be elsewhere. Technology became the voice Kelsey could no longer use, and it spoke clearly. It told investigators the truth her killer tried to hide. When news of the case spread through Woodland Park, the entire community reacted with disbelief. Store owners who had seen Kelsey shopping with her baby days before were shaken. Neighbors who once saw Patrick feeding cattle on his ranch felt sick. Parents held their children tighter. Women locked their doors earlier. People whispered about how someone who looked so ordinary could commit something so horrifying. It became the kind of case that changed the atmosphere of a small town forever. The trial was one of the most emotionally charged events the community had ever seen. Courtrooms are usually stiff, controlled places, but during this trial, emotions felt heavy enough to touch. Each day, people filled the seats, some friends of Kelsey, some complete strangers who just wanted to witness justice. The prosecutors presented a timeline so detailed that many people said they felt as if they were walking through the crime themselves. Forensic photos, phone logs, luminol images, maps, calculations. Every piece of evidence brought the story into sharper focus. But the testimony that shook the courtroom the most was Crystal's. Her voice stayed steady, even as she spoke words that made others wince. She told them how Patrick contacted her after the murder, instructing her to go clean up the mess. She described how she drove for hours, mentally preparing herself to see something terrible, and then stepped into a nightmare. If you're finding this documentary informative, please give the video a like. It truly helps the channel grow. People in the courtroom covered their mouths as she described wiping up blood, scrubbing walls, cleaning appliances, picking up toys, and trying to erase all traces of the violence. One juror later said that listening to her was like listening to someone describe a procedure they had done many times before. There was no tremble in her voice, no panic, just a strange, unsettling calmness. When investigators took the stand, their testimonies carried a different weight, the weight of trauma. The kind of trauma that stays in the mind long after the case is closed. One detective said he had seen homicides before, but nothing compared to this. Another said the scene left an imprint in his memory so vivid he would never forget it. They spoke about the brutality of the attack, the way the blood patterns told a story of repeated blows, the force used, the desperation in the splatter. They spoke about the smell of chemicals in the air when they first entered the home. The eerie quiet, the knowledge that a baby had once crawled across that very living room. When the final arguments were made, the jury didn't take long. The truth was overwhelming. The evidence was undeniable. Patrick's actions were beyond anything they could excuse or rationalize. The guilty verdict felt like a wave of relief and heartbreak mixed together. Relief that justice was served, heartbreak that such justice was needed in the first place. In the aftermath, the community tried to heal. People put up lights in Kelsey's honor. Candlelight vigils were held. Friends shared stories about her warmth, her kindness, the way she smiled with her whole face. Her family focused on raising her daughter in a loving environment, giving her a life filled with joy instead of the darkness she came from. They were determined that she would grow up hearing stories about who her mother was, not the horror of how she died. Even now, years later, investigators still remember the case as one of the darkest they ever worked. Not just because of the violence, but because of the absence of humanity behind it. The cold planning, the calm execution, the chilling aftermath. It remains a reminder of something people often forget, that evil doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it plays the role of a partner, a father, a neighbor. Sometimes it walks calmly through a hallway holding a coffee cup, moments before committing unthinkable violence. And that is why the murder of Kelsey Berreth is still known as the case so brutal, so calculated, so emotionally empty, that even investigators who had seen everything said this one was different. As we wrap up this documentary, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments what stood out to you or what case you'd like us to cover next. And if you found this video valuable, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next investigation. Your support, every like, every comment, every subscription helps the channel continue bringing these stories to light.